Now, as it turns out, a lot of CEOs I talk to and a lot of team leaders I talk to don't like to hold people accountable. And it's usually the gruff, tough-looking ones on the outside that I think, oh, they'll say, oh, I'm great at holding people accountable. I don't have a problem with that. And I'll say, really? Oh, that's great. Why do you say that? Because I fire people all the time. And I was like, really? Well, and he goes, yeah, I fired somebody last week. Pick someone here. I'll fire him right now just to prove it to you. Firing people is not the greatest act of accountability. In fact, it's often the last act of cowardice. Sometimes we have to do that. But when we talk about accountability, we're talking about something far more behavioral and less transactional. We're talking about a leader of a team having the courage and love for his or her teammates and members of the team to go to them and confront them about very specific things so they can change. Now, I told you before that I don't like to do this. And there's a technical term for leaders that don't like to hold people accountable on teams. And I'm what's called, if you've studied graduate level psychology or business, you probably know this, I'm what's called a wuss, right? And many leaders are wusses. So let me tell you two stories about two corporate leaders that were wusses. One was a very important senior executive at a company. In fact, he was the CEO of a company. And he had been hired to be the CEO, president, and chief operating officer. They gave him all the big jobs. The company was in crisis. They hired this guy. They said, help us turn around the company. A year later, he had stabilized things and had really made some progress. And he went to the board of directors and said, listen, I really don't want to be the president and chief operating officer. I just want to be the CEO. I'd like to hire somebody to run the day-to-day operations. And the board said, well, you've earned the right to do that. Go out and find somebody. So he went out looking for a president and chief operating officer. And while he was out searching for that person, one of his direct reports, who I will call Fred, started to tell everybody on the executive team and others in the organization, he started going around and saying, I'm going to be the next president. It's going to be me. Well, Fred was not at all well liked by his peers or others in the organization. So people were really concerned that he was going to be their new boss and the new leader. And so one of the members of the executive team went to this CEO and said, I got to talk to you. I have a question. And he said, yeah, what is it? He goes, did you know that Fred is telling everybody he's going to be the next president of the company? And the CEO said, I had no idea. No, that's news to me. That's the first I've heard of it. He goes, oh, okay. Next question. Is he going to be the next president? And the CEO said, oh, absolutely not. Oh, gosh, no, I would never make him the president. That would be terrible. Oh, good, good. I'm glad you said that. Okay, last question. Are you going to tell him to stop? And the CEO said, no, I don't have the time and the energy for that. I don't have the time and the energy. I hear this from leaders all the time. I don't have the time and energy to have that conversation with that guy, to tell him to stop telling everybody that. I'm too busy. Once this happened to me, I worked for the CEO of a company. And I was in charge of leadership development and training and communication in a company. And I had my annual budget review with the chief financial officer, who was a little bit of a curmudgeon-y, old-school CFO. And so I went in to go over my numbers for leadership development and training. And he said, Pat, before we get into your numbers, let me tell you, if it were up to me, I'd fire you and your entire staff and put the savings to the bottom line because I think these programs you do are silly. But I told you I'm from California, so I thanked him for sharing, you know. And then I said, Fred, we'll call him Fred too, Fred, but these are the CEO's programs. You need to go to your next door neighbor in this big company, his next door neighbor was a CEO, and have it out with him and tell him you think this stuff is silly and either convince him that you're right and put me out of my misery here, or let him convince you that this stuff is important and get on board. He goes, I'm not going to do that. I'm too busy. I said, fine, then I'm going to have the conversation with him. He goes, I don't care. I knocked on the CEO's door the next day. I said, hey, Mark, Fred hates this stuff that I'm doing for you. He doesn't want to fund it. He thinks it's a waste of time. You need to go talk to him. He goes, oh, Pat, that's just Fred. Everybody knows that Fred's like that. And I said, well, not everybody knows Fred. It's a big company. And even if they do, it hurts the programs. It makes the executive team look bad. And it really hurts the efficacy of what we're trying to do in leadership and training here. And the CEO said, Pat, I'm so busy. I got Wall Street. I've got angry customers. I've got lawsuits pending. I'm too busy to deal with that kind of stuff. Now, what do you notice about both of those examples? In neither case was it a leader saying, I don't have time or energy to hold people accountable for missing their numbers 4 quarters in a row. Because even the wussiest CEOs will do that. I don't have a problem with that. Hey, you missed your numbers. What can I say? You're a nice guy, but I'm going to have to do something here. They didn't have the time and the energy to hold people accountable for their behaviors. For their behaviors. You see, behavioral accountability comes first. We have to hold people accountable for behaviors because behaviors always precede results. But most leaders of teams say, I'll just wait for the numbers to come in, even though I see the behaviors that are going to lead to that. We know it as parents. We know it in our personal relationships. Behaviors lead to the problems on the bottom line. And if we care about our companies, and more importantly, if we care about the people that work for us, then we have to start holding them accountable for their behaviors first.